So as Brett said, I am trained as an entomologist, but it seems like a very long time ago. I got my master's degree in entomology and specifically focused on forest insects. So black flies definitely fall in that category, although I mostly studied moths. So no moths in the program tonight. I don't think most of us hate them. So when I was getting ready for this, I really started to think about what are the insects that people ask me over and over again, what is the good of this insect? And so with that, I came up with a list, and I actually asked some students yesterday at a school. I said, so what are the insects that really annoy you? And so they actually echoed back some of these. So hopefully you'll agree that these are some of the more annoying insects that we have in New Hampshire. And we'll see if we can find some things to love about them. So with that, I am going to share my screen. I just wanted to give a little bit of a refresher course for those of you who may not have been studying pollination in second grade with me this week. It's been a while for a lot of people. What exactly is the biology of pollination in the first place? So in the first place, and this is my favorite pollinator, by the way, is one of our native bumblebee species here in New Hampshire, not an annoying pollinator in my book. This picture is showing a bumblebee on a dandelion, which is something we see a lot of right now. The idea of pollination is really the transfer of pollen from a male part of a plant, which is the anther, to the female part that then later enables fertilization and the development of seeds. Usually, most often, this is going to happen through animals moving the pollen or wind. We've seen a lot of wind all over cars, tabletops outside lately. It can also happen in other ways through water and things like that. But we are going to be talking specifically tonight about insect-mediated pollination. So as a refresher, this is a complete flower. And by that, I mean it has both male and female parts in one bloom. So this is a diagram showing that. I'm not going to quiz you on all of these terms later because there are many. What I just want to point out really is the anther, which is here, that has the pollen on it. The pollen from an anther of a particular species of flower needs to make its way into the stigma, which is a little opening here in most cases. Then it will travel with a pollen tube down, and the seeds will develop here where it says ovule. So as you're probably aware, many flowers and trees do not have complete flowers. They have the male parts on one structure and the female parts on another. Sometimes the male parts on one tree, the female parts on another. So the idea is to prevent self-pollination in many of these. So as I go through and talk about anthers and stigma, that's just what I'm referring to here so that we're all on the same page. So this is what we've been seeing a lot of lately is wind pollination. So these plants that go through wind pollination will be almost, this particular one is showing either a beech tree or birch tree that has these things called catkins, which are the male flowers. And then the pollen is going to travel through the air and hopefully land on the female flower, which is very, very tiny. Other plants that are going to use wind pollination, there are just so many. Maple trees often use that. There is some insect mediated movement, but for the most part, that's wind pollinated. Almost all of our cereal grains are wind pollinated. Lots and lots of different, like really common tree species around us are wind pollinated. So the pollen of a wind pollinated plant is very, very tiny. It's not sticky like the pollen of an insect or bat or bird pollinated plant. So it's a very, very different grain, very, very small grain. So it's going to be very, very easy to float through the air. Insect pollination here, there is nectar at the very base of the bloom. That is what is actually luring the insect there. It turns out that in the evolution of the flower, pollen was evolved first, and then much later, plants started to evolve nectar. And that is just simply there to get a pollinator to come to that bloom. It has no other purpose. So the insect comes, drinks the nectar. In some cases, like a bumblebee, wants some pollen, packs it onto their legs, moves on to another flower of the same species, Hopefully a little bit of that pollen comes off the body, goes down into the stigma and fertilizes that flower, making a seed. So that's the basics of animal pollination versus wind pollination. And from now on, we will be talking about animal pollination. So with this one, I just wanted to show you, this is a up close look at pollen grains from different species of plant. So you can see here that the very, very tiny green ones, those are going to be from a wind pollinated plant. And as they get larger, they can't travel in the wind. So these spiky, larger pollen grains are going to be from plants that really do rely on animal pollinators. And they have those spikes. I know it looks a little coronavirus-like, but it's not. And they have those spikes to help them grab onto feathers or fur or insect body parts so that they can then be moved to the next flower. And my favorite part of this one is this one here that looks, I don't know, it looks like a squashed cantaloupe. But you get the idea here that every species of plant has a very, very different type of pollen grain. And this is why, if you've ever gone in for allergy testing, you'll find that you can see why some of these would be more irritating to some people than others. And they're really very specific as to what folks are usually allergic to. So the animal pollinators in New Hampshire, the bird pollinator that we have here, the one and only, is the ruby-throated hummingbird. I've been seeing a lot of videos of these lately, so I know they're here and at people's feeders, and hopefully there's going to be some flowers blooming for them very soon. The insects that pollinate in New Hampshire are quite a list. Bees and butterflies, moths, wasps, flies, and beetles are our main pollinators in New Hampshire as insects go. So we will be focusing on those pollinators in this list, specifically, really the wasps and the flies, I find, are those that really are the most irritating for folks. So we will look at those now. Just a reminder, I'm a bit of a taxonomy nerd. That's not the reminder. The reminder is what's an insect. An insect is a type of arthropod in a special class called the insecta. They have 6 legs and 3 body parts, 2 antennae, and then the rest of it is incredibly variable, which is why it's such a fascinating topic to study. So we will move on and look at some of these insects that might be a little irritating. First one had to be the mosquito. This is the #1 insect that people ask me about. What is the point of a mosquito? So a little bit about taxonomy here of the mosquito. The mosquito is in the order Diptera. So what this refers to is that it only has 2 wings. So all insect orders except Diptera have 4 wings, unless they have none, which is a whole nother problem. But insects will either have 0 wings, 2 wings, or 4 wings. And if it has 2 wings, it's a Diptera. So this is what we call a true fly. And this is what a mosquito is. You'll see here that we have worldwide over 3,500 species of mosquito. And in New Hampshire, 43 species have been identified. This doesn't mean there's not more, but that is how many that have been identified, 28 of which feed on vertebrates. And some of them specialize in frogs. Some of them specialize in feeding on birds. Some on more maybe like cattle, things like that. And then of course, they like us. So that tells us a little bit about why they're so annoying. 28 of them are going to feed on vertebrates, and that's the species, okay? So as you're all probably all aware, the mosquito life cycle has most of it, the vast majority is aquatic. And so females will lay these egg rafts. They will hatch out into larvae. They are a really good source of fish food and other insect food in the aquatic ecosystem. They will then pupate and they will emerge often right at the surface of the water. It's a pretty amazing thing to watch if you've ever seen it. Come out of that pupa and just fly away and be ready to go. This here shows us, this is a species in New Hampshire, and this is called the snow pool mosquito, is the common name. So people have all sorts of common names for insects, but this one is commonly called the snow pool mosquito. And The female mosquito if it's a vertebrate feeding mosquito, that female is the only one that bites you. So males don't need the blood because they don't need the protein to make their eggs. So when the female mosquito hatches out, the first thing she needs to do is find some nectar, because it turns out nectar is like her power to go off and find a blood meal and find a mate. So she first needs nectar. And if she first needs nectar, she's going to end up in a flower getting pollen on her body. So believe it or not, female mosquitoes do pollinate. Male mosquitoes are more effective, however, because they're constantly looking for a mate. Their whole short life, they're zipping back and forth to flowers to get some nectar. So they have that quick energy to go mate again and mate again and mate again. So you'll see here, the right-hand side is the male, and he is at that flower to get some nectar. In the meantime, he's got you can see his leg is touching the center part of that flower. So it's getting some pollen grains stuck to it. So the next flower he goes to, he will be very effective at pollinating it if it is the same kind of flower. All right, so here is another, I loved this picture. This mosquito is standing on obviously a very, very small flower. I just think it's a fabulous picture. It's got that piercing mouth part that we normally think of as piercing our skin, and it is going deep into the flower to get the nectar. In the meantime, that pollen is touching its foot and so on. So it'll be able to transfer that to the next flower it steps on. So this is one that made me a little ambivalent about the power of a female mosquito with pollination, in that if the female does not find a nectar snack before she mates, she will lay fewer eggs, have much lower energy stores, and be less able to even find that mate in the first place. So this made me think, well, it would be great if she didn't do any of those things, because we want her to lay fewer eggs and we want her to be less able to mate. But fact is, most likely, if you have a garden with very small blossoms on flowers, so a flower species that has very small blossoms with a collection of small, like dandelions are great because they're not going to get stuck in down deep in like the lily they would get stuck in. So they're going to be there and they're going to be coming and getting the snacks in your small the small flowers in your garden. This is one of the only species of flower that has been shown to really rely heavily on male mosquito traffic. And this is the northern bog orchid. So most other flowers can find other pollinators. There's lots of other pollinators, but this one there's a lot of research on, and this is a alpine species. And that snow pool mosquito that I talked about at the very beginning is a pollinator of this. And if without that, these orchids do not succeed nearly as well. So that shows you what sort of size of nectary that mosquito wants to go to. They like those very, very small blooms. And here is a picture of a male mosquito on a flower, and you can see those pollen grains really stuck to the legs. So that really shows how sticky that pollen is and how it's going to get all over that insect's body for it to transfer to the next bloom that it visits. So yeah, so when you smack those mosquitoes, the next time you see one, if it's a female, that's what's biting you. The males will not come near you. There's no point. Oh, I did want to add one thing. This was just a fun fact about mosquitoes. That, that really irritating sound that you hear when there's like a mosquito stuck in the tent with you and you know it's coming. That sound is exactly what depends on the species, the pitch of that sound. And that sound actually is what the male mosquito hones in on to find the female of the right species. So that's how they find each other, because it's a big world out there if you're a male mosquito trying to find your partner. So what they're going to hone in on is a particular pitch of that buzzing frequency of the wing beats of the female. And I'm actually just going to go back for a second to show you guys something. So I'm not sure if you can see on the male mosquito, his antennae are very feathery. So think of those like a tuning fork, and those little feathery appendages on the antenna are actually what are going to vibrate and get him all excited that he heard the right female. So if it's the right species of female, her wing beats will make his antenna feathers vibrate just a little, and he'll follow that and go find her. So mosquito fun fact.
That's really fascinating, Jenna. And a few questions did come in while you were sharing that.
Okay.
So one question is, do the different species of mosquitoes feed on different types of flowers? Like, do they have specific species, interspecies relationships with their?
It doesn't seem to be. That northern bog orchid is the only one that I was able to find had a really specific species of insect that has been studied. It's very possible that as we study this more, we'll discover more close relationships. But as far as I found, it really had to do with the specific size of the flower more than the species.
Okay. Dave wants to know, can mosquitoes hatch in a moist lawn even without standing water?
No. Thank goodness.
Melanie's asking, do only the females make the buzzing noise, or do males make that noise too?
As far as I can tell, the females make it much louder. The males make a milder, but it's not an adaptation for them to have that noise because they don't need it for anything really. So it's possible if you're stuck in a tent with a male mosquito, you might hear something, but I don't think it would be as loud from all the reading I've done.
Anyway, there are more questions.
Okay.
Have some of the small flowers co-evolved? So have mosquito legs evolved to carry pollen well?
Mosquito legs have not really evolved to carry pollen well, no. The pollen is really what has been the one evolving to really just grab onto a visitor, just be super sticky. So the pollen doesn't care who's coming. The pollen is just going to stick to whatever insect or critter comes by.
Okay, we have a lot of questions actually. Okay, I'll just do a couple more so we don't get too caught up in mosquitoes. Are various species of mosquitoes active at different times of day?
Yes. Yes. And I can't rattle them off right now, but the ones that are, there's a couple that are active at dawn and dusk that are the ones that typically carry things like triple E and West Nile. And that's why you read so much that at dawn and dusk, you should wear long sleeves and bug spray. Some of the day flyers are not quite as bad. There is one day flyer that is an invasive mosquito from Asia. That's a day flyer. And I believe it was like 5 years ago down in Rindge, New Hampshire. They caught some in traps of whatever, I think it's the Asian, I can't remember the name of it. It's an Asian mosquito. And they were carrying West Nile. So there was all this, like, should they close the school grounds at lunchtime so kids didn't go outside because it was a day flyer? So I think they did an insecticide spray. But the short answer is yes. They really have a tendency to divide up the day almost into, it's like they've talked about it. I know they haven't.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more, and then the others I'm going to hold on to, and if we have time at the end, we'll come back to them. But this one's kind of a myth-busting question, which is, there's two myths that this person's asking about. One is, do mosquitoes see color? I've heard that you should avoid wearing red when you're in the woods. And I've also heard that you should avoid eating bananas before hiking because the mosquitoes are attracted to a scent we give off after eating bananas. Are those things true, or are they myths? I've heard both of those myths. I've heard both of those things too. And
I haven't heard either one. And now I have to go look them up. I don't know. I do know that there was a really big study done of people with stinky feet. And the stinkier the feet, the more the mosquito of this whatever species wanted to bite those people. So we know they have a particular scent that they do go to, maybe bananas, I don't know. And we also know that the more carbon dioxide a person is emitting. So let's say someone is like super fit and I don't know how this all works with like individuals emitting more carbon dioxide, but there is an issue there with one of the things they detect is warmth and carbon dioxide. So yeah, so many myths. I don't know. I'm going to look that one up now. Bananas and the color red.
I heard the banana thing on Mr. Wizard when I was a kid. I don't know if you remember that show when he was the science.
I think I'm too old for that.
And I remember that he talked about bananas and hiking. But okay, there are several other questions, but I think I might wait for them until the end.
Yeah.
Make sure we get to all the other insects that you want to talk about. So I will take notes.
Okay.
bring those questions
All right,
if we have time.
great. Okay, so black flies had to be the next one. I found this fabulous cartoon. I had to show it to you all because it is black fly season here in New Hampshire. And there is a little girl that I teach at a school here in New Hampshire that just moved to New Hampshire from another area of the country, and she had never experienced black flies before. I think she's horrified. This is probably a good cartoon to show her. So yes, this is what's happening right now in New Hampshire. So what is the good of the black fly? So first, I always have to do my little bit on taxonomy. This one also is a fly. So it is a two-winged insect. It's in a different family than the mosquito, as you might imagine. There are about over 2,000 species in this family known on the globe. 40 of them live in New Hampshire, but believe it or not, only 2 of them bite us, which is crazy to think about because it seems like they're all biting us. In this picture here, I have to move my Zoom screen here. The insect on the top is the male. And one of the rules of thumb with many, many, many insects is that the male generally has much bigger eyes because he has to find his partner. So he's looking for that female. That's how often you can tell with honeybees, the male has bigger eyes, many, many insects. So just a little rule of thumb there. And you can see here in this picture, there's a little yellow knob underneath the wing here and a little white one there. And all flies have adapted their hind wings to be these structures called halteres. And this allows them to be really effective at flying. Most flies are very agile, not all, but most. And those structures behind the forewings, again, were the millions of years ago, they were the hind wings. They have adapted into the structure. And now they help it kind of figure out its position in space, how fast it's moving, wind speed, all sorts of things. So that is, you couldn't see those on the mosquito, but you can see them here. Whoops. All right, this is the black fly life cycle. It is also aquatic. They really like clean running water, so clean streams. They are going to lay their eggs in the water. It shows on a leaf here, but that's really not accurate. That I think they mean the leaf to be in the water. It has, depending on the species of black fly, it will have 4 to 9 larval stages with a really, really cool mouth part. So I have to show that to you. Then it will go through a pupal stage, which is like a cocoon, and come out as an adult. Here is the larva. So here's something to like about a black fly. Those 2 fans in the front are its mouth. It's just grabbing what's coming by in the stream. So it anchors itself to something at its rear end, which you can kind of see here. And then it's just going to sort of filter, grab whatever is coming by for it to eat. Here is the pupa. So it's kind of a strange looking thing. This one would normally be anchored to something, but for the picture, it is not. And this, it turns out, it looks sort of similar to a blueberry flower, which is one of the reasons that I think it's interesting that black flies, there's a myth that black flies are a pollinator of blueberry. They are not. But they are pollinators of this plant called leatherleaf in New Hampshire. And they are also pollinators of other small flowers. So I'm not sure quite why. There was this big study done looking between leatherleaf and blueberry in New Hampshire. And they found no evidence of black flies pollinating the blueberry, but they did find evidence of them pollinating leatherleaf. So who knows if the nectar tastes different, but they are there for the nectar. So for whatever reason, they really like leatherleaf. There haven't been a lot of other studies, but there was one other study that showed that they like other small, basically flowers with small nectaries. There's some evidence that very small insects can actually get stuck in the nectar of a large flower. So they're going to aim for smaller flowers so they don't get stuck in their dinner. This is the mouth up close and personal of a black fly. So what I wanted to show here is these here are what they're biting you with when they bite. So these are its like jaws, essentially. Then this is the labium, which is like their tongue, and they are going to suck up the blood with that tongue after they bite you. And again, it's only the female that bites you. same as a mosquito. But this labium, I added this little red and nectar because that's how they're drinking the nectar out of the flower. They are using just this tongue to stick that into the nectary, slurp up some nectar, and then off they go. And this structure here is the antenna. It's not the, it's not the most lovely looking antenna, but there it is. So with black flies, similar to the mosquito, they emerge from their pupa, they come out, and the first thing they need is nectar. So they can't develop their ovaries at all without the nectar. And then they're going to have the energy, as well as being able to develop their ovaries, to go off and search for a mate and then some blood to sustain their eggs. So it is required for both male and female black flies to find a flower. All right, that is my black fly story. Does anyone have any questions about the black fly?
We're waiting for questions to come in. I'll say that Emily shared that their mouths are like mouths of barnacles, which is what I thought of.
Yeah. I mean, flies have the most diverse of all the groups of insects on the planet. Fly mouths are the most diverse. Like you think about, oh, butterflies all have that pretty curly proboscis. Flies, I mean, there's every combination in flies. There's the piercing mouth of the mosquito. There's the biting and sponging of the black fly. There's the just sponging of the house fly. It's just amazing, the diversity in flies.
Okay, a few questions came in. Eleanor's asking the question I was going to ask is, why does the black fly bite itch so badly, and why does it create welts that seem to be so much worse than the bites of other insects? Have you read anything?
Well, the only thing I really know about the black fly toxin is that, which I bet all of you already know, because it's the first thing to notice about a black fly bite, is that it just keeps bleeding. And that's because they have an anticoagulant in their sponging mouth, so that as they touch you with their sponging mouth, they're putting an anticoagulant in so your blood doesn't clot. So they can just, if you don't notice them, they're just going to keep drinking your blood. The longest, the studies people do are amazing. Somebody studied and it fed for 4 minutes on some woman. They just watched it. So as for the itchiness, it's really interesting. Some people react much less than others. So I don't know if it's a more individual thing or what it is, but I don't know what it is in their saliva that makes us itch. It's a good question.
Do you know what their range is? Someone's writing in from Pennsylvania and says he doesn't think that you have them down there, and I don't think you do. I grew up in New Jersey and we did not have black flies in New Jersey.
I don't know, but what I did learn in this, which I thought was another really interesting study, is that they can fly 40 kilometers. So let's say you're up on a mountain and you're like, in the wind, and you're like, and the wind dies down and suddenly there's black flies on you and you're thinking there's no stream right near here. I'm on the top of a mountain. It's because they can really travel. The next question is, how did they study that? We were joking around at my house about, like, could you tag and recapture a black fly? We'd love to know how they figured that out.
No kidding. Carl's asking, what creatures eat black flies? Are they essential food for something?
A lot of critters eat them both in the water and as they're flying. So birds love them. I watched some, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget the name of the bird. It was a couple weeks ago. I watched some birds that are insectivores that really particularly eat on the wing. So they're flying and eating them while they fly. That's how they like to feed. And they were just going bananas for the black flies. So certainly insectivore birds, and also a lot of things in the aquatic environment are going to love those larvae and pupae. I don't think there's a specialist though.
We have a great photo from a birding outing that maybe 2 years ago, of a warbler in a tree with a swarm of black flies around its head, and the warbler was just feasting. So if you like warblers, you should appreciate black flies. There's a question about, same thing with the question about wearing certain colors to avoid them. Heard
this I read about. Dark colors they love, particularly dark blue and black. So those will attract them, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And are they vectors for any disease that you know of?
Not around here. There is one in I think it's in Africa. Is it river blindness? Is that an African disease? It's river blindness though. I don't know if it's that's a South American, somebody might know that. But they do vector river blindness.
And then there's two more questions that are kind of related to each other, which are about feeding and piercing the skin. So one is, how do they pierce the skin? I've heard they rasp the skin rather than puncture it like a mosquito. And
True.
then a related question is, do they use all their lancets at once to bite, or just one at a time, and then they constantly replace them?
Oh, they use, so their lancets are like, our jaws go up and down. Theirs go side to side. So they're basically kind of going scrape of a skin surface. And then they have the same mouth parts. They're not going to get rid of them. It's like us. We have what we have. So it's not like a use and then get a new set. They are going to scrape exactly like the top layer of skin and then get the blood with that tongue. Does that help?
And then the last one, which is a related question to mosquitoes. So Courtney's asking, are there any tips for keeping them off your dog? And related was a question about non-toxic repellent for mosquitoes or black flies, and whether it's different for mosquitoes and black flies.
I don't know a lot about repellents, sadly. All I know is that my very short-haired dog gets a ton of black fly bites on her belly. And I haven't yet figured out what to do about that. So if anyone knows of anything, please email me and we can share that out somehow. But yeah, no, I'm not one. I don't know a lot about repellents, so I apologize on that one.
Okay, and the last one, which is probably a short answer, is what is the lifespan of a black fly?
It depends on the temperature, but it's not more than a couple weeks. So it's a very short lifespan in our area. And if the hotter it is, the more quickly they develop and die. Yay.
All right, so we should be glad that around here we're having some days in the 80s to move us along.
Okay, so this one is, I don't know if a cluster fly annoys everyone, but it really annoys me, so I included it. So a cluster fly is an insect. This is the perfect cartoon for the cluster fly. These are these flies that look just like house flies, but they seem absolutely dumb as a box of rocks. They will like hit your window like 20 times. They'll get up in your light fixture and like douche, 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 you know, like over and over, even though there's definitely a way out. You're like, why can't you get out? You know? So they seem like the low IQ in the fly world. It's the only way I can really put it. This is what they look like. They look really a lot like a housefly. Their mouth part is the same as a housefly. It's a sponging mouth. They can't bite you. Again, we have an annoying insect in the order Diptera. Interestingly, the name of their family is Pollinidae, and they're in the genus Pollinia. So it's interesting that they are, whoever named them knew this, that they were a good pollinator. About 200 species have been identified worldwide. We have about 6 in North America. Not surprisingly, these have not been studied very extensively because they don't bite anyone. They don't do damage to your house. They don't spread a disease. What they do is this kind of thing in like a window. And they typically will do this on the south side of a house. Yeah, I just find them to be like, if you're lying in bed on a summer night and it gets stuck in your light, it's so irritating. So what are they? Their niche in the world is that they are a parasite of earthworms. So that's why a lot of farms and things will have very, very big populations of cluster flies in barns and things like that, because they will the female will lay an egg in the soil near an earthworm den. And then that egg will hatch, that larva will burrow into an earthworm, often killing it, not always. It will emerge, pupate in the soil, and then fly maybe into the barn and bash into the windows. But while they're adults, they are very effective pollinators as well. So they have this very hairy fly-like body, and you can just barely see the little halteres that make them a fly, that extra set of wings that's adapted for flight control. And they are very much a generalist pollinator. They're just there to get a little nectar. They don't really care. Doesn't have to be a tiny flower. It doesn't matter if it's a big flower, which is good because for the flowers, these guys are really effective. So here's an example. I apologize for the letters going across the picture. There were so few, there's so little information about these. But you can see here, it's got a little bubble of nectar right on its mouth part here. So it was able to reach down. It probably got some pollen on its feet in the process, and it was able to grab some nectar, and then it'll fly off and pollinate another one of these species of flower. So a really helpful pollinator. Now I personally feel like I will not be so annoyed by them. Here is another one. You can see it's a totally different flower structure here, right? This one is a female, and you can tell this because it has these golden hairs on its thorax. I like that. I learned that. And finally, there was one really good study of cluster flies in New England, and they are a fabulous strawberry flower pollinator. So this is a reason to like cluster flies, I've decided. Generalist pollinator, they'll pollinate lots and lots of different things, and I love strawberries. So bonus about cluster flies. So I'm doubtful that people have many cluster fly questions because I might be the only one who's irritated by them, but feel free to put any in the chat. And in the meantime, while we're waiting, I will just show you back here again, fly antenna. So remember we looked at the black fly, you could see the antenna on that up close and personal picture. They're right up here. So it's in a very different place on flies than many people expect. They expect it to be like on the back of the head, but the antenna are right up here. And remember, that's their nose, that's their scent organ, that's how they're smelling things. So it makes a lot of sense for it to be right up in the front of their head. All right. Any questions, Brett?
No questions have come in for cluster flies.
I am not surprised. Okay, we are going to keep going then. This one is a lot of wasps out there this time of year already. It's been very dry. Wasps like this dry weather, particularly the ground nesting wasps like this dry weather. So this is our first annoying pollinator that is not a diptera. So this is a hymenopteran insect. Hymenoptera include bees, wasps, and ants. And hymen means membrane and ptera means winged. So whoever named this order thought that, well, they have two pairs of membranous wings. So that's why they named them this. There's not a bee or a wasp out there that has like a crunchy pair of wings like a beetle. They're all these very delicate membranous wings. And there are many, many flowers of many families, excuse me, of wasp. And just to put it out there, yellow jackets and hornets are both types of wasp. So people often ask, well, what's the difference? It's sort of like a dachshund is a type of dog, right? A hornet and a yellow jacket are types of wasp. So just a fact here to begin with is that wasps are omnivores. So as larvae, they feed on other insects. And as adults, they feed on nectar. So if you see an adult wasp out collecting an insect, or in this case, this is a caterpillar, what they're doing with that is they're going to chew it up and bring it back to the hive. And they'll chew that up much like a mother bird would, and they'll spit it into the little cell where the larva is growing, and they will give that baby a really, really rich protein meal of whatever critter they've chosen to chew up and bring back. So that's what they're eating as larvae, and it's brought by mostly their sisters. Their mother will do it to start, but then once that queen has her helpers, her workers, she's just going to stay and lay eggs. These are in the social wasps, and then the sisters will bring the sort of meaty meal back to the hive. But the adults have to have nectar. Again, that's their easy food source. That's what they're going to use for all their energy. And they have to have a lot of it because they're buzzing around to try and keep those, the daughters and their sisters alive by bringing food to them. So I pointed out the tongue here on the wasp. Wasps also have those chewing mandibles, their jaws. You can imagine them on an ant, right? Those big, like people call them pinchers. But here we have, you can see the mandibles are up here, and then the tongue is down here. So, and all of these mouth parts on all of these insects evolved from the same basic structure. So when you think about the black fly biting you, it's their equivalent of a mandible here. And then the black fly equivalent of the tongue is, here it is on the wasp. So nectar is super important to um, and it's mostly females that are doing, actually it's all females that are doing this work, bringing things back and forth to the hive. So I just wanted to point out an obvious fact. Bees and wasps are both in the Hymenoptera group, but bees are fuzzy. So even a honeybee, it's not this fuzzy, but it's fuzzy. Wasps are not at all. They're very smooth. So as such, wasps are not nearly as effective at pollinating. So one visit to a flower is not going to be nearly as effective as one visit that a bee makes to a flower. It's not going to pick up as much pollen on its body, but they are generalists. They will go to many types of flowers. So you can see all these different types here in these pictures. You have, some with really big flowers, some with compound flowers, some with tiny flowers, and they will go to all of them because they just need the nectar. So whatever is available to them, they will go to, pick up some pollen on their feet, maybe on their abdomen, travel, and that way they are very effective. So not as effective as a bee, but still very effective. So I wanted to show this. This is a bald-faced hornet nest, and a bald-faced hornet is actually a wasp, so it was misnamed. And the reason that they have to visit so many is that they're raising all of these in one nest. So whether it's a ground nest, or in this case, this one looks like it was, maybe on a piece of wood or a tree branch, they are raising all of these offspring together. And most of these will have layers and layers of this structure. So they're going to start off by the queen will lay worker eggs and have to feed them. Then the drones are the males. Those are in that section of the nest. They'll have to be fed too. Future queens get even more food. They need a lot of protein. So these are some busy insects. Point being, they have to go to a lot of flowers to be able to have the energy to do that. I think that might be the last one on wasps. Yes. Okay, and we are actually almost there. So we could get to, we only have like 3 more slides, Brett. So if people have questions back in the mosquito category, we can go back to those.
Okay, why don't you go forward, because there was the only question in this category was really a question about bees. So we'll do that at the end.
Okay, great. All right, so my last category is incredibly short because it turns out no-see-ums, which are known as they're a biting midge, and we have them in New Hampshire, but there is like nobody has studied if they're pollinators. So these again are in the order Diptera. And there are many, many, many species of this family worldwide, about 5,000. This is what a no-see-um looks like if you could see it, super small. And it turns out that the only information I could find on these in terms of pollination is that there is a species of these that that is the only pollinator of the cacao flower. So if you like chocolate, and who doesn't, these are tiny little insects that, here they are mating. And you can see here that, I think this one is the male with these feathery antennae. And they are going to produce, they're the only reason that we have chocolate, because that is the result of their mating, is they mate, somebody has to go get the nectar so that they have the energy to mate before they mate, and then we have pollinated cacao flowers and then chocolate. So as much as I would love to have found some information about New Hampshire and no-see-ums, apparently nobody has studied that yet. You could be the first. And with that, I will stop my screen share. And if anybody has any questions about bees or wasps or no-see-ums, we can go from there.
Okay, well, there is a question about bees, which is from Maggie, what can I do to increase the number of bees? How can I help bees?
So lots of ways. It's really exciting, actually, this question. The best thing you can do to increase bees is, I'm doubting that Maggie uses any pesticide, but that would be the first thing to stop doing. But the next thing to do is to plant native species, because we have just so many native bees in New Hampshire, and they evolved with our native plants. So if you go to your local garden center and you tell them that you want You know, for example, black-eyed Susans. You buy the black-eyed Susans that are native to New England as opposed to something from England. That will be a better way to support our local pollinators. So things like that. And then also having a variety of things blooming in your garden throughout the summer. They're always going to be, like, there's a period right now where we have all these dandelions and the bees are pretty happy. But then they'll go away and we'll want to have something else coming up nearby. I will add that you've probably all heard that honeybees travel like 2 to 3 miles in search of nectar. Native bees only go about 500 yards. So you really need to be like, if a native bee, say a bumblebee, is nesting in your garden, you want to have something close at hand for them. They're not going to go off miles and miles away to look for nectar. So something close for them to feed on.
And I'll put a little plug in for the Harris Center's pollinator garden, which was designed and is maintained by a group of wonderful volunteers. They designed it so that there's something in bloom from basically May through October. And we have a plant list for those of you who might be interested in modeling some of your plantings after ours. And it's organized by bloom order. And it's on our website, and I'll put the link in the chat for that. And I also just want to mention something that I recently learned just in the last few years is that some plants that you might get at garden centers are treated with neonicotinoid pesticides before you even buy them. And so it's important to look at the labels to make sure that you're not bringing those plants back to your garden, because those can kill bees and other pollinators.
For sure.
Okay, so there's a bunch of questions that have come in. What are those wasp nests made of?
Oh, they are made of wood. So basically what a wasp will do is they will use those mandibles, those chewing mouth parts, and they will go find some dead wood. And lately it's the railing on my porch. It's not treated with any kind of, you know, chemical. So I've watched them, they'll go up to the railing and they stand there. And if you look really closely, they're really busy. So they're not going to sting you. And they just kind of rasp with those mandibles. And they get off pieces of the wood and then they chew it, and then they use their saliva to spread it into a paper. So it really truly is, you know, it's like the most basic way of making paper. It's just wasp saliva and Jenna's railing wood.
Rose is saying that bees are hitting her hummingbird feeders. Is the sugar water harmful to the bees and the colony?
It shouldn't be, no. I mean, if it's just simple sugar water, it should be fine. I bet they're attracted to the color. Bees have very specific colors that they're attracted to. So they may be thinking that's a flower that, and then they get there and they detect there's some sweetness there as well. So they may be attracted to two things there. It shouldn't hurt them at all. So if they get there when the hummingbird is not and they can get some nectar out of it, then great.
Linda and Rich are wondering, why do deer flies always go for your head?
Oh my gosh, deer flies. I have like a really big hate relationship with deer flies. I don't know why they do it, but I'll tell you a trick that we had a camp counselor, Brett, you might remember, it was like 5 years ago, maybe more. And he would take a red Solo cup and cover it with that sticky stuff. And somehow he attached it to his baseball hat with like baggy ties through the little holes. And sure enough, all of the deer flies will get stuck to it because they are attracted to red and they go up. So again, I don't know why they go up, but if you want to use the Solo cup trick, you can catch them.
So here's one that's from a little further afield, but has been in the news. Sarah's writing in from Phoenix, Arizona. What about killer bees?
That's awful.
What are they? Is the hype for real?
The hype is for real, apparently. I've read a lot about them, and they're a hybrid that was created trying to hybridize a honeybee with another bee that was a bigger nectar producer, apparently, or honey producer. And the hybrid, they didn't get the right combination of traits. And so what they got was a more aggressive bee instead of a more docile bee that made more honey. They got a more aggressive bee. And these will displace honeybee queens. It's apparently quite an awful problem in the South. And I think it's really this all across the South now. I think they've really spread quite far. So they're certainly pollinators, but we don't want them around. They're very dangerous. we're hoping they don't adapt to the cold climates up here, because apparently that's what's been keeping them in where they are, is that they're not very cold hardy.
This is a question, I think, back to the wasp, that kind of cut out of the hornet nest. What's the difference between a drone and a worker?
So a drone is a male of either a bee or an ant. That's usually what a bee, wasp, or ant. So it's in the Hymenoptera group. And if you're in a social, one of these species that's social, you have workers, which are female, and then you have drones, which are male, and then there's queens. And the drones don't collect anything. They don't feed the larvae. They're literally there for reproducing, and they'll produce drones at a particular time of year to go hopefully mate with another colony, so there's no interbreeding. And the workers, which are females, are doing a ton of work, and their lifespan is actually pretty short in the summer. That's why they have to crank out so many workers, because they're working so hard in the hot summer months. I will add, though, I think I said all social insects. That's true. Termites are in a different group, and the males and the females do the work. So that's a whole different, I don't want to mislead on that one.
So here's a question, another kind of like truth or myth or truth question. And we've probably got time for just a couple more. But I've heard that the current fad of bee hotels actually mostly attract parasitic bees and that this is harmful to beneficial bee populations. Is this true?
Well, it's a complicated answer. Basically, the bee hotels, which are, you can buy them at Agway, you can buy them online. The idea there is that they're a home for the solitary, well, it's not a home, it's an egg laying location for solitary wasps and bees. And so what's happening there is the female comes along, she lays an egg at maybe the back of one of these holes in the bee hotel. She provisions it with pollen, and then she does this throughout like the little tube, whether it's a hole or a piece of bamboo, and then she leaves and never comes back. So then those offspring will grow up and leave. The problem comes when those don't get cleaned out. Like if you're a person like me who doesn't do a lot of like maintenance on things over the winter, they're a problem, because you're going to host little parasites in there, little mites in there. And then when the female bee comes to lay eggs, a different one, of course, in the springtime or the summer, she'll be laying her eggs into a horrible situation that's already ready for, parasites and things. So they can be good things, but you have to be able to clean them in the off season, which many folks don't know. And so it's problematic. So long answer. Good question.
Okay, I think we probably have time for one more. So I'm going to pick this one because we started to talk a little bit about deer flies and how annoying they are. So Jill is wondering, are deer flies or horse flies also pollinators?
I am guessing yes. I did not look them up. I can't believe I didn't think of a deer fly, because I really do have quite a long relationship with deer flies. I'm guessing yes, because again, of that need for energy. And they have they have that same tongue-like appendage that a black fly has, is just bigger, right? So I'm guessing that they, yes, can go into a flower and get nectar for energy, because again, it's only the female that needs blood. So at least the male's going into nectar flowers in search of nectar. So that's my educated guess.
Well, thank you, Jenna, for such a wealth of information. I'll try to keep this in mind while I'm feeding the black flies in the next week or two, that they're not all bad. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I hope you'll come to some of our other pollinator talks, starting with tomorrow night. We've got a bunch of really great spring and summer pollinator focused events. So hope to see you at some more.
So before we close it, Brett, I'm just going to put my email in the chat. So if anybody has any questions that we didn't answer tonight, or something I was stumped by, like the banana question, I always like to follow up. So if anybody has any questions you want to reach out, then I would love to hear from you. And if not, that's fine too.
I think we should add that banana question to Ask a Naturalist to our next.
I think we should.
That's a really good one.
That's the first thing I'm looking up as soon as I log off.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jenna, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Brett, for moderating. Have a good night, everyone.